Thanks for tuning in to the Guitar Gavel podcast, and a special thanks to Steve Kuykendall for composing this music and being such the great guy and friend that you are. As a reminder, hit the subscribe button and sign up for our twice weekly newsletter at guitargavel.com. Hey everybody, welcome to the Guitar Gavel podcast. I'm your host, David Still, and I am super pumped for today's podcast. Joining me, a very special guest. As I have a little case of laryngitis, I'm coming at you from Studio C at the in-laws house. But today, Frank Meyers, who, if you don't know Frank, you may know this book, The History of Japanese Electric Guitars. He authored it in 2015. We're going to talk about that book today. If you don't know him from there, you may know Frank from Premier Guitar and his Wizard of Odd monthly column about, generally speaking, oddball guitars. They don't have to be from Japan, but they're from somewhere. So we're going to get into it with Frank. Frank and I have been going back and forth for a while. He has got a little free time, and I look like, I told Frank before he came on, I said, man, I've done this a bunch. Maybe I had too much coffee this morning, and it is not morning, but I'm like nervous. This is great. So Frank, thanks so much for your time, brother. Really appreciate you coming on the show.
No problem, David. Happy to be here. I'm glad we could carve out a slot.
Me too, man. Me too. And thanks for bearing with my voice, which means you'll get to do, 99% of the talking, which is the way I try to keep it. I'm stuck over here right now, so we'll go with it. All right. I kind of lead in all my podcasts. We're talking about guitars. We're talking about your guitar journey, and you have a special one. But it really starts with that first guitar. Tell us about when you started playing, who turned you on to the guitar, and if you remember, what was your first guitar?
Yeah, I do remember. I had one guitar for like one day. And so I was born in the 70s. So I'm thinking like this was probably 79. I had some sort of like basic, 70s Strat copy that I had, Sunburst, Japanese import. I remember I only had that for 2 days because a kid down the street from me had a little mini bike, and I wanted to get it. So I traded the guitar for the mini bike. And, the mini bike was like my lesson in oil changing and, motorcycle maintenance. But that was my official first guitar, but I only had that for like 2 days. Then later on, I think for some reason, I wanted to start playing guitar. I don't remember quite why. It might've been like, I don't know, like early, like 80s metal. I have no idea. Like when you're young, you have such bad taste, but there's something about the guitar that appealed to me. And I grew up really close to Nazareth, where Martin guitars are made. There's a little store there. It's still there, called the Nazareth Music Center. And that's where I took lessons. At first, I didn't have anything, and they suggested I buy something. So somehow, some way, I think my dad got me. It was like a little, I forget what it was called, but it was just like your typical vintage Japanese import guitar. It's in my book because actually it turned out to be the very first guitar made, the first solid guitar model made at Fuji Gengaki, and it was this one. So my first guitar is that, I believe it was that single pickup one right there. That was my very first guitar. Cool. And I kept it with me all those years. My love affair with guitar came and went, being like a typical kid. You'd be in the sports or you'd be in the whatever. So I would take lessons for like a year, and then I'd quit. And then my mom would get mad at me because I had this guitar, and then I would go back and, take lessons again. So it was always like sort of like a lover's quarrel with the guitar. I was into it and I was not. And I didn't really get into it until I learned power chords because, they were always teaching you like the open chords, and, you're trying to play like, I don't know, like Johnny Be Good, and they never sounded right on an open chord. So then finally, through time, some, lovely soul in the form of a music teacher came around and showed me power chords. And that's when I really got into it. And that kind of came in late into the punk scene. So like, you're talking like 84, 85, where I was really discovering all the punk bands that were around, and punk bands were coming to my area through there's a little town called Catasauqua, and there was somebody who was always like sponsoring these punk shows. So you'd see like Black Flag roll through. The Ramones came through here a bunch. Like we would see them in Wawa. And if you don't know what Wawa is, it's like a more of an East Coast like convenience store place. But we would like, you'd be like young and you'd be hanging with the older crew and you see like these guys and they were like, you couldn't believe it, but they were just regular guys just trying to, eke out a living, doing what they loved. And so that's where I kind of like really developed my love for guitar and that real aggressive, like that punk style, real fast. I think, people tend to play what they feel in their hearts. And I guess as a young buck, as a young teenager, early adolescent, I must have had aggressiveness in me. And that's what was appealing to me at that time. So that's what I really liked. And I tell you, I could bang out a lot of raunchy sounding punk through that Fujigen guitar because, it was built by people who were just learning their craft. So you got a lot of natural distortion. You got a lot of natural grind. I always sounded distorted. Like that guitar never sounded clean. And I thought that's the way a guitar should sound. So it just appealed to me and I stuck with it.
Did you ever play any bands like junior high school?
Yeah, I did, but they were all like crash and burn. You'd like, play it like you'd practice for a couple months, you play a show and then it would disappear. And, in high school, I had a hard time finding people who liked what I liked. So that you tend to, there's only like a couple like extreme weirdos around. So I would sort of like, they would find me or I would find them. We'd be like sort of, universally attracted to each other. I found more people when I went off to college and I had more fun there and we would do house parties and, I could play, by that time I knew how to play like a 12 and 8 bar blues. And I could just, I could hang. If somebody said, we're doing this in G, I could play in G or if I could play in different keys, but mostly I just loved like, fast, power chord riffing, but no bands of any note. It was a lot of fun. And we had fun just, thinking about the future, but no, nothing ever came of it, which was fine. It was all about more fun to me.
After the first guitar that we just looked at,
Mm-hmm.
What came next? Did you get an American guitar or did you just stick with that for a long time?
No, I stuck with it, but I never got rid of it. Eventually, I was a big Nirvana fan and I got to see them twice. I saw them in Hoboken in '89 and I got to see them at Lehigh University in '93. And when I saw Nirvana in '89, Kurt was playing like a Mosrite copy. And I was like, whoa, I love the sound of that. Like it wasn't quite P90-ish and it wasn't single coil. It wasn't humbucker. It had a really weird sound. And, I have that in the book too. I used that guitar for a long time. It was I can't even think of the name now. I forget some of the stuff that I wrote in the book because it was so long ago. Back then I didn't need readers. So look, everyone, this is what happens to you when you hit 40.
Bro, I know. I'm the same way.
It was a Mastumoku made guitar. It was really popular in the later 60s and 70s. I don't even see it now. I can't find it. Darn it.
It's all good. Take your time.
Let's see. Well, it came out in the Area Diamond. There it is. My High Flyer, of course. I gotta be so stupid. Yeah, the High Flyer. That was my High Flyer. I used that for a long time. In fact, their bass, if anybody who like switches to bass and has a hard time switching because of the size, this bass, the High Flyer bass was just killer because it was super light. It was super small. It felt like you were playing a guitar. I love that one. But this is the guy I used. My main rig for a lot of times, my whole sound was built off the Univox Super Fuzz, which is my favorite fuzz of all time. And over the years, that was like the orange one with the blue pedal. When I was younger, there was a music store that opened up. And I said to the guy, I was trying to explain to the guy what I played. And he was coming from a different era. And sort of that's the stuff was sort of passe. They looked down on a lot of the Japanese imported stuff if you got into like the Gibson or the Fender, like the Gretsch or the nicer stuff. So they kind of like looked down on that. But he said, if you want to play a fuzz pedal, this is the one you need to buy. And it was $100. And I remember thinking, $100, like that was so expensive for me at the time. But I somehow scrounged up the money, went back. I still have that Univox, Super Fuzz to this day. Mudhoney made an album called Super Fuzz Big Muff or Big Muff Super Fuzz or whatever. And I remember the one guy I liked to play with, he was a Big Muff fan and I was a Super Fuzz fan. And then I played through a Harmony bass amp called the 420, which was a Valco thing. And that was really close to what we found out later. People think that's what Jimmy Page used. He used like the Thunderbolt bass amp, and the Harmony was just the Harmony version of that Thunderbolt. But for whatever, I used to turn the bass way down and treble all the way up, and it just the most like just thrashy sound ever. It was so great. After that, around 92, my girlfriend at the time bought me a Jagmaster, which was a Fender Squier product. And I remember like I think they were selling for like $400 or $500 at the time, but the local guitar shop had like one brand new, and it was like $125. So bless her heart, my girlfriend at the time, it was like this leftover Squier that nobody wanted. And the Jagmaster, which was a combination of a Jaguar and a Jazzmaster, came. Funny thing is I sold that guitar one time and I regretted it. And then I found it again and I bought it back. So I still have, I don't have the High Flyer anymore. My Fujigen EJ went to Japan. That's it at the owner's place. So the only one I still have left was that Jagmaster. I still have that. It was a good series, that Squier. It was a Vista series, it was called. And all those guitars were made at Fujigen, which was still is a fine guitar, factory. So.
Absolutely. Wow. And how rare that it came back to you. That normally doesn't happen, man. You know this.
I know this. Yeah, I know. The neck pocket was broke. Like where you have the neck pickup and then there's a little piece of wood and then there's the neck pocket. I remember I took off the neck and it was broken. I was so heartbroken. So I glued it back together. It's fine. And my son loves it. And I change the pick guard and I'm always changing pickups in that thing. But that was like my first, I think, real good guitar. Was like sort of like as you get better, I think your skills, you demand something that's a little more playable and you don't have to fight with it so much. Like those early things, you really had to fight with those guitars to get good sounds. It was not coming easy. So when I got that Vista series, that Jagmaster, I thought that was just the greatest thing ever. I mean, I used to like when I was a kid, I played sports, and I remember if my mom bought me like a gear, I would like just keep it in my bedroom and just like look at it like, oh my gosh, it's like the coolest thing. But when I got that Jagmaster, I remember I was really into guitar at that time, like late 80s. And I just seen Nirvana and they just blew me away. I couldn't believe how powerful they were. And I had that Jagmaster like in my bedroom. And I remember just like I'd be laying in bed and just lovingly like looking like, oh, I'm so happy I have that guitar. So, it's the love affair you have with these instruments. It's worthy of, telling stories about them.
Yeah, man, it sure is too. So when did the Wizard of Odd, the oddball guitars, the imports. Yeah. When did you really start getting interested into that? And you can kind of just like take that all the way into the book because it's kind of a big deal.
Yeah. So in the 90s, I was going to college. I was really into guitar at the time. I was really into Nirvana. There was a real cool resurgence that happened in the 90s of like, it was like almost like a second or third wave of punk came along. My favorite band at the time was a band called Teengenerate. Now they were from Japan, but there was no coincidence. I didn't have like a Japan fixation. They were just awesome. It was like the most lo-fi, upbeat 50s revved up rock and roll that was just pure, and it was just beautiful. There was other bands that I really loved called the New Bomb Turks. Oh man, there's just so many I'm going to forget. The Makers I really liked at the time. Man or Astro Man was like they were playing like instrumental sort of like space age surfy stuff, and they were using like 60s visuals. I just know there's going to be like bands that I love. Oh, the Mummies I loved a lot. Like and they were sort of like taking me back. They were playing music that they were doing like covers, and they were playing in a style that reminded me of like 60s. Like they were using organs and they were using, I don't know, just like trashy gear. And I just became interested in that, like that sound. And plus, like I started to appreciate like what you see. All right. So when Japan imports first were flooding into America in the 1960s, sometimes like let's say a shop, I don't know, you wanted to order your own special like brand. Like I wanted to buy, I own Meyers Music Shop, and I wanted to have Meyers signature guitar. So you might get like, their minimum orders at the time were like 10 or 15. So you could order like the really small personalized, like, you could like design these on your own sometimes. And when they came, they became so rare on the used market, like sometimes not a lot would survive. So I was always going into pawn shops and music shops, and I would go on like day trips with friends of mine. And, this is like, at the dawn of like popular internet, right? Like we're talking like 94, right around there. And we would go on like these epic day trips and just drive, and, no GPS. We just have like hastily scribbled out. But you go into music shops and you see guitars in there. You're like, what the hell? Like, what is that? It was like stuff that would just like blow your mind. And I started to think like, I want to get these. They just look so cool. You'd pick them up. You knew that they were not going to play well. You knew that you were going to struggle, or they might have dead pickups, or the neck would be warped. Like you could see this, but you just like wanted to like save them, because at the time there was there's very little interest in those really oddball, weird things. At the time I was reading Vintage Guitar Magazine, and in the back they would have, classified ads, and you'd look reading these ads, and there was a couple people who I later became friends with, but you'd see there was sort of like kindred spirits who were also into these weird things. So I have an example of a guitar that I can show you that I found, and it was like the weirdest thing I'd ever seen. It's like if you think of like a Mosrite on steroids and cooler. And in my mind, I'm thinking, well, there's like a Mosrite that you can spend, and even back then they were well over $1,000, or you could buy a guitar for like $100. And I started like thinking, wow. So this is one of my early finds. Now, this was a really strange guitar when I first saw this. And I thought, oh my gosh, I just discovered the coolest guitar I'd ever seen. You can see this hummingbird up there. There's a T on the headstock or TG that stood for Tokai Gaki. If you look on the back, you can see there's a neck plate that says Tokai Gaki. Tokai turned out to be a music instrument factory that's still around in business. Gaki means guitar in Japan. And when I saw this guitar, I was just like flipping out. My friends are like, what the hell? Like, you like that? And I'm like, yeah, I like that. And look at the sharp horns. I mean, it is an exaggerated Mosrite, which I turned out later to find that's what it was designed to be. Didn't particularly well, but with the basic maintenance and knowledge of guitar, you could turn something like this into a really playable instrument. So when I saw stuff like this in a music store, like some dudes at the time were really into like the super strats, or like the I don't know whatever was in like fluorescent, like whatever. But I was not like that. I was always one of the weird ones that was like seeing that kind of stuff and being like, oh my gosh. So it turned out to be every time I'd go out, if it was cheap, usually it had to be around 100, and it was weird looking, I started to buy it. And, I wasn't married at the time. So, I had money to spend on this stuff. And even like $100, people think, oh my God, that's, for a college student in the 90s, that was a lot. So I started to amass a little collection. But what was weird about it was I kind of wondered, like, where did this stuff come from? Like, who the hell was designing this? Like, where, like, you would never see something like that in America, and almost all the people that I had grown up with, we had all started on like Japanese electric guitars. They were imports. And I just started to like think about it, like who were these people? Because, back then, and even today to a certain extent, everyone would call every Japanese guitar a Taisco. Like you would call, a tissue paper Kleenex, or a Q-tip's a Q-tip. They're brand names. It's not like where they came from. So I started to get interested in that. Like, I was like, where's Tokai? Like, what is Tokai? Or what is a Taisco? Or what is a Gaiatone? Or what is Yamaha? I knew them as like, motorcycles. I had a friend who had a Yamaha motorcycle. So these things started to like, kind of like puzzle me. The same thing with certain like American makers like Valco, who made Supro guitars, or Airline. So I started to become interested in like the lower end of the guitar market, but things that were interesting, that were not like copies. I started to like hate copies. I hated the super strats. I had a Super Strat. I still have a Super Strat, but I, you know, it was only because it was like the time. And like, if you want a guitar, you go to, you know, a guitar shop. It's like, yeah, man, you got to buy this Ibanez, you know, play it so sweet. And like, I was never like a shredder or a tapper dude. I was more like a really fast, aggressive caveman. Like, I wanted to just bang out tunes as fast and as aggressive as I could. And the sound tend to lend itself to these. But at the same time, I was looking at it as like an artistic kind of thing. Like, I started to see guitars as like almost like art. Like, you would hear like whispers of like, you know, like, oh, there's such a rare guitar and it's made of like plastic, but you can really play it. And I'm like, plastic. So then you start looking for that stuff. Or somebody say, yeah, you know, I saw this guitar with like a hole in the body. And I'm like, what? Like a hole in the body? Where, you know, where is this? And then we'd like drive. We'd like 2-3 hours and, you know, find this thing. It was all like word of mouth and phone, you know. Like, I guess I had a cell phone, but I remember just like, you know, the dial at home. So, all right. So that was like my passion. And I was like sort of piecing like guitars together. If I found a neck that looked cool, I'd buy it. If I found weird pickups that looked cool, I'd buy them. And then sort of like piece together like these, like, you know, crude instruments that I just sort of love. Then as the internet started to take on and you could reach out to people through email, I started to reach out to people who, like, I suspected knew a lot more about these than me. And I would, you know, when Facebook started to become popular, I got into Facebook early because I was in college at the time. Facebook started to like, so I could get, you know, at the time it was only limited. You had to have a college address to be on Facebook. So I got on there, and then, you know, groups came along. You get groups and you chat with people. And I would hear people say like, oh, like, I don't know. I don't want to be too specific, but I would hear people say, oh, that's a Teisco. And by this time, what I was doing, you know, like full nerd mode, I was literally taking apart guitars and using a micrometer in millimeters and measuring things. And I could see like if this pot, like, I know only this company used this pot, or I know only this company used these switches. And I started to have guitars in groups, you know, and I could tell like these all came from the same factory, like the same wood, the same cut. You could just sort of like tell things, you know, just from seeing them. It's like guys with old motorcycles or old cars. You just start to see, like, as soon as you see it, you know what it is. And I already had that knowledge, but I was talking to people and they were saying, no, you know, that's made by this, and I was thinking, nah, man, I don't think that's right. And, you know, you get into arguments, and I'm not a real argumentative kind of fellow. I'm more agreeable. And I was like, all right. But there was just something gnawing at me. I felt like, you know, these people who were in Japan or in Italy or in Germany or even in America who had contributed like a ton to American music, like a ton. We might not even have certain genres of music if somebody hadn't had, you know, $10 to buy a cheap guitar. You know, like, they might not have ever picked up guitar if it's not for these people. So I started to think, you know, these people need to be recognized, and their story sort of needs to be told. And plus, I was tired of seeing people argue over things that I knew weren't true. So there I started to send out emails to Japanese people. And how did I meet Japanese people? Well, I would go on Google and I would, you know, you could like search by country. And then I would see that there were folks like me that were into these old guitars. Then, I don't know, I guess I'm backtracking a little bit, but in the mid 90s, I had a girlfriend and she hooked me up with this book. Now, if you have never seen this book, this became my Bible. This was called Bizarre Guitars of the 60s. I think this was written in the 90s, mid 90s. I don't know, quite remember anymore. It was written by a guy named Hiroyuki Nogouchi, and we all should like give him a heap of praise because he took the time, kind of like the same age I started taking the time to properly research. And he, you know, would travel around Japan and take pictures of people's, you know, like collections, and then write about them. The only bad thing was, you know, the book had great pictures, but it was written in Japanese and I couldn't understand any of it. So, you know, I would have like a girlfriend who was, well, no, it actually wasn't my girlfriend, but a girl I knew, her mother was from Japan, and she was trying, but, you know, if you didn't have like the proper lexicon, she wouldn't know how to translate some words. Like if she would see something like asymmetrical, like swept wings. She might not understand. So it was very hard to kind of like dissect and look at. But the book had tons of great pictures, and he had things organized, and he had stories that were in there. So after reaching out to a couple people in Japan, they were sort of getting back to me, and they were like trying their hardest in English to communicate with me. Oh, there's a phone. I told you that might happen. I don't know if you want to.
You're good. You're good, man.
Okay. I'll wait. I know what I'll do. Hold on. I'll pick it up and I'll hang it up because it's the pharmacy calling, so it's not that big a deal.
Nice.
Okay. we're good. All right. So anyway, I started to get in touch with more Japanese people who already had established websites and who were already interested in these guitars. They were called in Japan bizarre guitars, meaning like they weren't American style, like traditional things. They were more like oddball weirdos kind of guitars. So I got in contact with him, and he put me in contact with people he knew, and eventually it came to a time where I said, I'm tired of like arguing with people. I'm tired of reading things on the internet that weren't true. I'm tired of people not giving these designers, these makers, their just due. I was just like tired of it. And I was like, I just got to tell this for real. I don't want to mess around anymore. I don't want to say, oh, I think it's this or I think it's that. Like I was tired of that. So my first degree was in writing and journalism. And they talked about the importance of, first person accounts. Now, listen, I had never been on a plane in my life. The first time I was ever on a plane, I flew to Japan by myself. I had a woman who I worked with. Her son was in Japan. He was going to school and he was learning the language, and he traveled with me, and I had already established this whole itinerary. I mean, I can't even believe I did this because now I couldn't do it. Like I can barely find time to get to the grocery store and like go to Rite Aid at the same day. Yeah. Like I'm like, I'll do it tomorrow. But at that time I was so driven, like I was so moved with passion to tell the story that I just did it. And I ended up meeting people who were in their 70s, 80s, and 90s who were sort of like shocked that an American would have any interest in what they had done, like 50 years ago. And the advantage I had ahead of Hiroyuki is because being an outsider, they treated me with like a lot of respect and reverence. Like you felt amazing. That, they would give you gifts. They would treat you so nice. And I was able to meet with, like heads of corporations. Whereas if you were in Japan, I think there was like an unsaid system where you couldn't just approach a CEO. Like for instance, the guys who ran Ibanez, it was a family business. Well, the first president of Ibanez, I think it was his brother was the second president of Ibanez. And then like it was either a cousin or a brother-in-law was the third president of Ibanez. And they all gathered for me. And I was like blown away. Because I didn't realize it at the time, but that was like a big deal. Like you couldn't just go up to these people and talk with them and meet with them if you were, a native Japanese person. So I think I had access that a lot of other people didn't have. So I got to meet, I found out who the owner of Tokai Gaki was and became friendly with him, and he trusted me. And Fujigen and Dynagaki and Yamaha and, it was just all these companies were coming together to give me knowledge and to pass on like gifts. I met like one of the early artists for Pokemon. Like I didn't know Pokemon, like what Pokemon, but he was like one of the original dudes that started Pokemon. And he had this vast collection. And I remember going in there and taking pictures of his stuff. I met some of the early Taisco employees. I met some of the early Gaiatone employees, like the son of the founder of Gaiatone, who hadn't spoken about instruments in years, met with me and talked with me and gave me knowledge. And, I got to eat grasshoppers and fish eyes, and I ate fish for breakfast. And it was just the most amazing experience. I spent 2 weeks there, and I recorded and took notes and took audio recording of everything I had done. And when I came back, I got to writing my own version with the help of all these people. That was I think I was in 2013. It took me 2 years to write it. And it was a shame is because you kept learning more and more things, and you would learn like stuff that I had written was incorrect, so I have to go back. But it just got to the point where, you just had to like get her done. So finally in, I think it was 2015, I finished. It was published. I went back to Japan for a second time to like gift the book to these people who had helped me, and these people were older. You're talking like, World War II. You think about your grandfathers, or, some of you might have fathers out there who are at that age. Like these were people born in the, the 19s, the teens, 1919, 20s, 30s, 40s. So, some of the people weren't there. So I feel real fortunate that I got to, pull some things out of their memories. And I felt like I honored them in a lot of ways because, no one had really taken an interest other than a couple of people in their own country. And, I felt really like I was really proud of that. I felt really special. And at least I could come back and write a book that I felt was filled with facts and not conjecture and not like what I thought or, my opinion. It was most of the stuff that was accurate. Now, there's always mysteries. There was like, factories back then that had popped up and disappeared without much memory. There were factories like Mastumoku was making wooden cabinets for Singer sewing machines. Yeah. And when the guitar boom happened, they just switched and they had all this old wood and they were making, guitars with, 200-year-old wood with beautiful Brazilian rosewood fretboards on like $100 import guitar. So it was, there's so many mysteries that still are out there that I'll never figure out, but I figured out probably 80% of, the history of them. And then I have my ideas, but I chose not to put too many opinions in there. I just want to put factual things that I found out.
Man, it's, I will do my best to talk here.
Good.
It's amazing that they were, I don't know if it's amazing. I'm surprised that they were surprised by your interest twofold. Because of the flood of imports, it made a gazillion more guitar players and guitar lovers in the States and around the world. And musicians that maybe never would have been household names that learned on a Japanese guitar or another country's exported product that was inexpensive, maybe tough to play on, maybe wonderful to play on. But they changed the face of music. And they're wonderful, skilled craftsmen producing some of the best instruments in the world. And they kept American manufacturers honest. And in theory, made American manufacturers better. Some would argue, listen, some of my friends would say, no, they didn't. Japanese guitar is still way better. And, that's a whole separate conversation. They're all, the cream of the crop, no matter where it's coming from, is still a great guitar. Yeah. But they just changed the landscape of guitar music for the world. So, yeah.
Well, I have another guitar here, and that kind of sort of speaks to what you were talking about as far as like pushing the American makers of the time. So I got another one that was made by RCA. Now, this guitar was made at Mastumoku. They made the wood parts, but RCA made the pickups. And this was actually has, if you look at the headstock, it has like the little dog and the RCA logo on there. But this was like a really short-lived guitar, but the pickups are freaking amazing. And that's because they, like RCA and the engineers, the stereo engineers, designed these pickups. So like this guitar, it didn't play well out of the gate. It had an interesting look, that pick guard's really interesting, but the pickups are like these high fidelity, like state-of-the-art pickups that you would never see on any other guitar. And this is where they were really trying to compete. Whether they were successful in competing as far as like a professional guitar, they probably didn't succeed. But where they did succeed is filling in that like low level, entry level kind of like niche. Now, that did drive out some other competitors like K or like Harmony, but they were also making sort of questionable instruments. Like an early K, they had like the brass frets, and they some of them were good, some were not good. It was like hit or miss. Like if the guy who's doing the frets woke up that morning without a hangover and had a good morning, didn't fight with his wife, he might got good frets, and otherwise you might get bad. So it was a lot that went into it. But like this guitar here, you rarely see these in the States, but there is nothing else that sounds like this. So when I would come across something like this and play it, guitars to me, just because I've heard so many, like you can hear it within like the first 25 seconds of either playing it or listening to someone plays it. The guitar either has it or it doesn't. That's it. And like this, when you plug this into an amp, you're like, oh my gosh, this thing's like incredible. But you would never probably use this as a professional instrument unless you did what I did, was had it like refretted and like the neck planed and flattened out and had everything reset up and all the electronics redone. But the pickups themselves, this is just an example. It reminded me, as you were saying that, about how they were really trying to compete. Did they ever make it or break it into? I don't know. But in the 70s and 80s, man, they sure did give any company a run for their money. And like you were saying, I know people who were, like really, they're like fiercely loyal to Japanese versions of like Fender, let's say, or like the Epiphone elitist. There are like people who only like elitist because maybe they don't like the hoity-toity of like the associated with a Gibson. So whatever, that's how it goes down.
When you were over there, or maybe just based on your research, and it wasn't just Japan, but the accordion industry had a huge influence on those early guitar makers, and all the switches, all the pickup selectors, and to me, practicality aside, it looks cool, right? Like 80 switches. Oh man, it looks cool. Maybe ridiculous, maybe over the top. It may be too tough to play live. I mean, there's a number of reasons why you may not like it. Did you find any other impetus for that construction of switch selection, pickup selection?
Yeah.
Was that just like, it looks cool, so we're going to do it?
It kind of was. It looks cool, we're going to do it. I mean, if their argument was, if you had a wall of guitars and you had one with 2 knobs and 2 pickups, or one with 4 knobs and 4 pickups, that would appeal to people. And I think that was more under the direction of the American importers and sellers. At the time, like I missed this. This was before my time, but back then there was a big interest in atomic energy and science lab kits. And like these little, I can remember like my friend's older sister had like these little kits that she could buy. And some of them had like crazy stuff that you would never want to give to a kid, but they sold. And it was like this fascination with like atomic and outer space and, Star Trek. And like I don't know, there was just this fascination with a lot of like bells and whistles and electronica. And I think that appealed. I think sellers in America saw that this was like a selling point for toys maybe, and they just applied it to guitars. But what you were talking about with accordions and like the lots of bells and switches, sometimes too, the country of origin determined like the design of a guitar. So like guitars in Italy, like you mentioned, they'd been making accordions and organs, but they would cover their stuff in like, just by being an American, you have like an ethos. It's like a common, I don't know, like a feeling. And we have a certain idea of how a house should look like or a car should look like or whatever. But especially in the 60s, at the dawn of this stuff, like 50s and 60s, when this stuff was really hitting. And I think design was really like impressive at that time. So they were really putting their country's ethos into the design of their instruments. So that's what I really like. I had plans to do like a trip to Italy. I wanted to go to Germany. I wanted to meet these people. I wanted to go to America and travel all around. But the only problem is I was a little late to the game, because a lot of these people, they're dying off, kind of like our World War II vets are getting up there so much, and they don't either have interest to talk about it, or, it's late. But thankfully we had enough other people that were interested in American stuff that they could cover it. But, the Italian story needs to be told properly, and that's done too. But, I always felt at the time, like I wanted to do that, like take it on and like, I don't know, pay homage to people, but it just didn't happen, which is fine, Yeah,
dude. All right. So you may not want to share this. Favorite, like one of the best playing inexpensive Japanese guitars you've come across.
Yeah.
And maybe not your favorite. Give me like number 3. So like everyone that watches this is like, all right, I'm going to look out for this. I'm going to go get it.
Yeah. I mean, I think some of the best made guitars at that time were made by Yamaha. They only had a short-lived, window in the late 60s, but the Yamaha guitars are just great. They usually had good frets. They use good wood. They had good electronics. They're solid. It's not saying that you won't need help, in repairing them, or you won't have to put money into them, but the Yamaha instruments are really good. But it's funny you mentioned that, because I did bring one of my favorite that are still sort of inexpensive. This was a guitar that I went to a company called Divisor, and they're making pretty high-end stuff. What I would call, and this sounds bad, but I call them coffee table guitars because they look like expensive wood that you would see on a coffee table. It's like finely grained wood. And if you spend any time in guitar shops, you know, like high-end stuff has like really, they look fine. But to me, I don't mean it to sound derogatory, but I think it does when I say it's a coffee table guitar. The Visor makes very high-end stuff. And I hope I'm saying it is the Visor. But anyway, I get to the back. There's this guy back there. Maybe it's not the Visor. I have to think about this. No, anyway, I get to the back of this particular factory. It's in Matsumoto City. There's one guy back there working on acoustics, and you know, we go up to him, and he's like one of the oldest dudes in the whole place. He's been building guitars in the early '60s, and there was a couple like mysteries. This was my 2015 trip, and I was like, man, I can't figure out, you know, like who made this one. And I'm showing pictures, and I show him my book, and he looks at one, and he starts to cry. And like, this is not common. I think most of the time the Japanese, and this is just a generalization, but I think they try to be a little more stoic, especially when they're meeting someone for the first time. But this guy started to cry, and you know, I'm thinking, what? And the translator said, "Oh, this was his first design." And these guitars were a mystery up until this point. I had no idea where they came from. I knew they came from Matsumoto City, but I didn't know that this was his baby. So here is an example of a late 60s Kent guitar. So you could see this was like none of us could figure out like where these were made and where these came from. But it turns out they were made at a little factory called Hayashigaki in Matsumoto City. You can see, I talked about coffee table guitars. If you can see the veneer on here, they tried to fancy it up, and it's sort of funny, sort of reminiscent of what I was talking about. This guitar was always famous because it had these rally stripes, which like sort of tied into like the whole Grand Prix, you know, Camaro GT, late 60s, like drag strip, hot rod sort of era. It touched on these. But this was designed and built by this fellow who worked with this company. And I had written about it. I can't remember the name off the top of my head, but it was like a big mystery solved. But these like late 60s Kents, I think they were made from like 67, 68, maybe early 69. They're still like attainable, right? Well, if you look at these pickups here, these pickups sound incredible. They're super hot single coils. Sometimes you can find these. Used to have one in blonde that I sold to some guy who was dying for it. I had a lefty. This is one of the, you know, you can see a lot of import lefties, which is why I think Kurt bought that high flyer back in the late 80s, because he just happened to make them in lefty. But this guitar is still somewhat affordable. You can sort of find beat up examples, but this is something that, you know, it won't be or shouldn't be like way over $1,000 like you pay for like an early Yamaha guitar, or something that's like super rare Teisco or something like that. Like, these are still somewhat affordable, and they sound great. If you like thin necks, you'll love these because they have a super thin neck, and they were just built well. I mean, they really tried on this model, and I don't think they sold well because Kent stopped importing these in the late 60s, and that was the end of it. But that's a guitar that, if you can find those, man, you can't go wrong. You really can't, especially the solid bodies. They were made really, really well.
When you were in Japan and you would go into music stores, like that guitar that you just showed, that Kent, or let's say an old Yamaha that were not exported to the United States, like what the Flying Banana and the Flying Samurai, I don't think were originally exported here, only for the Japanese market. Are those readily available?
No.
You
I mean,
you ruined my trip to Japan 10 years
no,
ago.
I mean, it's still worth it. I think there was a resurgence in desirability of those things, but most of them came here. I mean, most of the stuff they made came here. There was a domestic market, but I guess, you know, it's like the old adage, like you want what you don't have. And over there, everybody wanted a Fender or a Gibson. They wanted like the real American stuff. The Ventures made the Mosrite so popular. Like, every kid wanted a Mosrite, and I think that's why a lot of companies wanted to copy that design, because it was just so famous. Like, the guys in the Ventures made that really, really famous. So yeah, they always wanted American guitars. I don't think they had like endorsers, pretty established guitar players over there, but I think they all preferred to play, Fender, something else, but they were so astronomically expensive. Inevitably, the people there ended up with something that was like can't say it's an import there, but a more affordable guitar. But anything that was American you had to be really wealthy to afford anything American there.
Yeah. How about that? Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
would that part makes sense.
Yeah.
Bummer that in my mind, I just kind of envision all of these guitars are like a late 70s Ibanez artist, like for sale for $300,
Well, you can
right?
see, you can find those. Like you can find 70s stuff. I guess I'm more, my heart and mind is always in the 60s, but you can find that stuff. But it probably won't be as expensive there. But there is a section in Tokyo. Again, I can't think of the name of the place, but there is like a music section there that is like, if you're a guitar player, guitar lover, and you want to go to Tokyo, you got to go there, because it's like, it was like the first time I was in a casino, I was like having ADD go off. Like I couldn't stay focused. Like it was just so much, but it was one of the most incredible experiences for somebody who, was, born and raised in like blue collar town. And it was, being a world away, it just opened my eyes to a lot of, like, I don't know. It was a really good experience. Everyone should travel. Everyone should travel abroad. You really should. It's good. It's good for the soul.
I'm going to talk about Japan for a minute and then switch. I want to talk to you a little bit about your website. But if we go back, and this is kind of post the era that you've written about, but in terms of Japan's lineage and their preservation and them being proponent of guitars, when CBS finally relinquished Fender to the ownership group in the mid 80s, 84, 85, or 85, 86, I think it was Bill Schultz and, the group that bought it. They didn't get the factory from CBS. Fender Japan had to save their butts for like 2 years. So if you're a Fender guy and you're a hater of look, there's not too many haters, but there's some haters, man. Right. We all know one, and we love them, but like Fender may not exist.
Right.
Theory, had Fender Japan not saved their tail for a couple of years in the mid 80s. Mm-hmm. So your website, which I did not intro when I introed you, Drowning in Guitars, where you've cataloged most or almost all of the guitars that you've had in your possession. Really great database of history, and you've got the videos, and the guitars are demoed. So here's what this sounds like. Here's what it is. Clearly that took forever and was a massive work in progress. And I don't know if you're still how much you do with it anymore, but talk a little bit about it. Maybe it's inception, and your guy Mike, who does all the demos. It's just really well done. So you got to talk to it for a minute.
Well, I will. First, to speak on that Fender thing, when there was a time when Fender was only made in Japan, and that was made at Fujigen at that time. And there's a couple people who are still around who worked on those original Fenders. One of them, his name is Nick Sugimoto, and he makes Sugi guitars. And I know he has a big following, and he's still around. And he was one of like the early Fender guys, where he was taking specific measurements of vintage Fenders to try to make the most accurate reproductions. So if anyone's interested in Sugi guitars, he has a small shop. He's cool as hell. There's an old Woody parked out in front of his shop, and I think he still skateboards and smokes cigarettes, but I love him. He's really a sweet guy. His mom was one of the first employees at Fujigen, and Fujigen, the factory, when I was there, I was in a lot of factories, but it really separated itself, because they were like it was amazing. It was a education and efficiency. It was a really good factory. And I see now why Fender chose them as their main factory. But getting back to my website, at the time, I think this was around 2000, maybe I started thinking about this, because I had been in a car accident, and my one leg was messed up, and I was having to get like surgeries, and I was sort of laid up, and I was bored. I didn't know what to do. And my father-in-law said, you should start a website, because, this is before book. This is like when I was just starting to I had all this information and knowledge, and he said, start a website. So I was like, all right. So there was a couple of times where I'd have an operation, and I was laid up for like a month or two, and then I'd work on it. And then I just started I got the idea, well, why don't I start to buy a guitar, fix it up, invite my friend Mike Dugan, who was just a superior guitar player, like nothing like a caveman like I am, like a really, like this is a true, like an artisan, like this is his medium, and he's an artist. So I kind of like went through that, and I thought, well, this is a good way to highlight him, because at the time gigs were starting to dry up. It was like starting to become like a less, especially in our area, it was like less of a gig based, deal going on. I also had another friend named Dave D'Amelio, who's Dano in my neck of the woods. And he was like this super good guitar tech, like 10 times better than I was. So I'm like, all right, I had this idea where I was going to buy cheap guitars, send them to Dano or me, fix them up, set them up, and then have Mike Dugan play songs from the era, because he was playing guitar since the Beatles had come to America. I was like, he saw Paul McCartney playing a lefty guitar and thought something was wrong because he's a lefty. So that was my idea, and that's where the website came from. So what I would do is I would catalog, I would take pictures of everything, and then we'd have them set up. Mike would demo them, and we just published the videos. And it was like a really cool, like fun endeavor. To me, it was not like, I know people are always saying like, how did you do that? Or thank you for doing all that. But you have to understand, like I was so driven by the passion for this stuff that it was like, it just became part of my daily routine, like brushing your teeth, or I just go downstairs. We have a huge basement in our house, a big studio. I had some good recording equipment, and I would still did it like a caveman. I would still just put a mic in front of an amp, go through the computer. I figured out how to separate tracks, and it just was like the pure sound of the amp and Mike's playing. But that's where that all started. And then I guess I had been doing that for, I don't know, probably like 4 years. And then I got a call from, I was always getting phone calls and like people pitching ideas to me, and they wanted me to like, I don't know, like, and I was always like, nah, I don't want to do it. But then I got a call from Premier Guitar magazine at the time. The chief editor was named Sean Hamm, and he was a real big believer in me. And he said, we keep using your site for research. You want to come write for us? You want to come work for us? And I'm like, all right. I mean, I already had a full-time job, and my kids were getting bigger, and I was married, and I didn't have a ton of time. But at first I was writing like big feature, like 10-page features. But then he said, well, how about let's do a monthly column? And I said, all right. He just said, just pick a piece of gear to write about each month. Oh, I saw you freeze there. I didn't
no, you're good. You're good.
Yeah. So I started like picking out a gear, and he said, what should we call you? I said, I don't know, whatever you want. He said, well, let's call you the Wizard of Odd. So that's where that came from. So I've been doing that. I think I'm up to like 8 years now doing that. But the only unfortunate thing is I don't write as much for my website anymore, because when you were in an English major, the professors used to say, don't write for free if someone's willing to pay you. So if Premier ever says to me, hey man, it's over, I'll happily just revert back to writing for my website again. But I used to be real active on like all the social media. But once you start getting paid for stuff, then you're like, I'll do it when I have time. There's no rush on it anymore.
On your website, do you have a ballpark idea of how many guitars you've cataloged and written about?
I don't, but I remember I used to keep like a running tally, and I was up to almost 500 that had passed through my house, like personally came and went. The whole idea was once we fixed these up, I would resell them after we had demoed them. And then it became like this sort of like a conveyor belt where, it was, it used to make my wife nuts, because they'd be delivering guitars all the time. And like the local post office people say, oh, that's the guitar guy, must be going to Frank. So many guitars have passed through here. Now I don't have that number anymore. It's a much smaller number. I just have like most rare, crazy, sound good, guitars that just I bonded with. Those are the only ones I have. But yeah, that was the whole point, was just to catalog it. And people I never thought about doing it for money. I remember like in YouTube nowadays, they just automatically put commercials on your stuff, but you could monetize your videos, right? And I never wanted to, because it was like, I felt like it ruined the user experience. Like, and people saying, well, like, where's this guitar? Like, they were like confused that somebody was just doing it out of like, just to share history. Like I didn't ever expect to make money. you don't make money writing, and you don't make money writing books. You don't make money, it's supplemental and it's nice, but you do it because you're passionate about it. And I can remember like people were saying, you got to monetize those videos. Cause even my kids now, they're like, Dad, you have like all these followers. And I'm like, what? It's like, I'm not from that era. I'm just like, all right, whatever, It was always more about passion for me and sharing the history. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Totally. Just for the love of the guitar.
Yeah.
All right. So do you have one more to show? Do we go through your guitar? Sorry if I.
No, that's okay. I do have one more, and I brought an American guitar because I think we spoke earlier about the plastic guitar. So back when we were like, kind of pre-internet, easily accessible, people were saying that there was like these plastic guitars that were made in America. And I'm like, what? Like, what are you talking about? And you hear like, oh, there's Supro. That was like the big thing. Airline was more like Montgomery Ward. I think that was out Midwest. And I don't know if we saw Supro a lot on I'm in the Northeast, so I don't know if that was a big thing. We saw a ton of Dan Electros up here. And like I said, we have Martins, but I was never really acoustic player, but Martin was up here. And you'd see like kind of like a lot of Dan Electros. But I did eventually find a plastic guitar. And it was not a real plastic guitar, but it turned out to be made of fiberglass, made by a company out of Chicago called Valco. And this was my Supro. I love this guitar. You can see it's hollow. It's put together. You see that piping that goes around there. And I think it's getting kind of dark now. We're losing our light. But anyway, this is piping. And you can see those screws in the back, which holds together two pieces, a top and a back of fiberglass. And you might be saying fiberglass, like, legit fiberglass, like what they would make a boat out of. And, this is a fiberglass guitar. Valco was trying to cut back on costs. The guy who ran Valco at the time was notorious penny pincher, and he was always trying to figure out ways to make things cheaper. So that's what he did, was came up with this idea. And plus, you didn't have to finish it, and they didn't scratch, and they don't wear. The pickups are what's really special about these. These Valco pickups were in-house design. No other guitar had these except a Valco made guitar. But, you can see people like Jack White or like Dan Auerbach from the White Stripes. There's a lot of people who've embraced and loved these pickups over time. And, it just goes to show you, like, even though these were, actually these weren't cheap when they came out. I think they were trying to compete with like the bigger brands at the time. But on the resale value, nobody wanted them because people literally thought they were toys. Like, they weren't necessarily serious instruments, but they sound incredible. And oh no, you don't have to worry about that. My wife is going to turn on the light, but let me know if it gets too dark and I can turn on the light. I'm in our dining room, and I thought this was like the only place where I could sit and there wouldn't be like, I don't know, but whatever. So anyway, this is one of my favorite guitars. I love this guitar. I think it's called the Dual Tone. It's a Supro Dual Tone. And if you can find any Supro or Valco and you have some knowledge about setting up guitars, these are great sounding. They sound like nothing else. They have their own unique sound. If you look at guitar playing like I do, and it's simply a medium, like music is a medium. And if you get something like this that's made of fiberglass in, sort of a cheaper way, this is going to be like a paintbrush that is unlike anything else in your brush, or a color that's not on your palette. So if you think about guitar playing that way, I don't know, like some of these weirdos and some of these lesser known ones, if you give them a little love, you can have a really good playing and sounding guitar that will be unlike anything else. And it may inspire you to create music that you never did before. And
you're helping guys find their own tone. What kind of last question for you? Bucket list guitar. I mean, have you, all the ones that you've wanted, have they come through your possession? Are you still, or is there one like it just costs too much, or whatever it is? Do you have a bucket list guitar that you have?
Yeah, I mean, in the beginning, there was a couple of Supro guitars I wanted. There was one called a Tritone. They only made in '59. They had 3 pickups. You said you knew that one fellow that you said uses my book all the time. Well, back in the day, him and I would go after a lot of the same guitars on eBay. And I'll never forget, I was going to bid on one, and I lost internet connection. and he got it. And I emailed him. I said, dude, I really want that. Can I get? And he said, no, I'm in this to buy and sell. And I was like, oh man, because it was like my literal bucket list guitar. It's called the Supro Tritone. I did end up finding one in California, which was really sweet. Then there was another one. I forget the name of it off the top of my head, but it was a Supro that had like a lap steel pickup and then a regular pickup up there. Huh. And I really wanted one of those because I was interested in slide playing. And, I got it and it wasn't that great. But the one guitar, I ended up selling that one. I still have to try.
I'm scratching it off my list.
Well, maybe I had a bad one. That's the thing. You can't, with these old guitars, like, it's like I said, I made the joke about the guy who, had a good morning that day. But some of the, quality control was not like it is now. Like there's like the Univox Super Fuzz that I spoke about earlier. I've had 5 of those and they've all sounded a little different. So you can't, I don't want to bash that particular model because, you could have a good one and you could have a bad one. That's how it goes when you're dealing with like vintage instruments. I think that's the same with Gibson too. Like a 59, you could have a good one or a bad one. It depends. People might not want to admit it, but I think it's true. But this guitar here, I always wanted it and I never got it. And I'm not going to like search it out anymore. But this one here, this Gaiatone model, I just thought that was the coolest thing. It was just so extreme. It had those 4 pickups. It had the jack was like located on the back of the body. I got to put on my glasses to read what this was, but this is
what page is that on?
So this, I don't think I have one of these in my book.
Okay. That's in the Bizarre book.
Yeah, this is in that Bizarre Guitar book, but this is an LG 200T. And I always wanted one of these. They did not really sell these in the American market, but man, if any of you have one out there that's cheap, I'll trade you for one. I kind of am over it now. Like I don't really need to have, but that was a hard one to find. Like you could not find it. And when you did, it was really hard to, like, if you were bidding on somebody, it was super hard to get. People, even in Japan, when they see those, they know what they have. Just a super rare, desirable old Gaiatone. And I never heard one, play. I think I have one in a catalog in my book in here, but I can search through. But that was like one of the guitars I remember. If it was a bucket list and it wasn't based on sound, it was just the design was so incredible. Like talk about an extreme, sort of crazy. I don't know, man. I just thought that was the coolest guitar I'd ever seen.
It does look rad. It's the best way to describe it. It's rad.
Yeah. So if you, in my book on page, let me see, it's on page 48. I have a catalog picture. So I never actually owned one, but I had one. I used to get a lot of stuff from, they have an American Music Trades. Well, there's also a Music Trades magazine in Japan, and they helped me out with a lot of the old like advertisements and stuff. So that's where it was. And that thing is just, I don't know, that's just rad. I always thought that was the coolest looking guitar I'd ever seen.
With the monkey grip.
Not that one. No, it didn't have the monkey grip. I'll show it again. No, the monkey grip's cool, man. I'm a big fan of that. But this one.
Oh, okay. Oh, I see it now. Yeah.
It's just a straight up. Like Gaiatone always had like weird stuff. Like look at this bass. Like just like look at it. It's so strange. Like when you would see like that sticking out of a rack of guitars, I was drawn to that. Where some people would be like, "Oh, that's ugly," and I guess it is ugly, but I don't know. They had to separate themselves from the American designers, so they just went more extreme. To them, I don't know if they even realized they were going extreme. They just wanted to go like. There's a word that Hunter S. Thompson used called gonzo writing, right? And I always felt like my first idea for a website was to call it Gonzo Guitars, like extremely ridiculous. Like somebody already owned that at the time, so I couldn't get that.
Of course.
Yeah.
Man. Well, Frank, I think we're at like a great wrap point. This has just been, thank you. I mean, this has been a wonderful conversation.
My pleasure, David.
What an amazing story. And from a guy who likes oddball guitars and researches a lot about guitars, just thank you because of your love and your passion, cataloging and categorizing and putting in historical context. That's something that maybe never would have been done if you hadn't done it, man.
Yeah. I mean, there was people that came before me. There's a lot of good writers that were, American born. And I owe them a debt of gratitude. Like you're saying to me, I appreciate that. But it was always good to read what other people were into, these like oddballs. And I was always appreciative of that. And there weren't many of us, especially in the early days, but there are some that are still around and kicking. And yeah.
That's great. Well, listen, I will put links to the website, to the book where people can buy, so on and so forth, in the podcast description.
Sure.
We'll leave it here, man. Just thank you so much for your time, Frank. Hold on after we're done. A couple of clicks to get out, but thanks so much for your time.
Yep, no problem, man. Take care, everyone. Take care, David.
Appreciate it, brother.
Yep.
Thanks for tuning in to the Guitar Gavel podcast, and a special thanks to Steve Kuykendall for composing this music and being such the great guy and friend that you are. As a reminder, hit the subscribe button and sign up for our twice weekly newsletter at guitargavel.com.